Better. All right. It's 3 o'clock in my place. We are in 3 time zones, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you, good day to you, and good evening to some of you. As we will, before we'll start our proceedings, and I will introduce all presenters, I would like to ask Professor Jeff Zafar, Director of EURUS, to formally open our conference. Jeff, the floor is yours. Jeff, Mike.
That's the first of many times I imagine that's going to happen in the next couple of days. I would like to thank yourself, Piotr, and Leah Rasmussen, our conference coordinator, for being part of this committee. It's been an experience to hold our first virtual conference and to have presenters now from different continents, different themes, and to have a really robust panel selection and have we're looking forward to an excellent discussion. I want to also thank Kinross Gold. I'd like to thank the Faculty for Public Affairs, as we're part of the research series, for their assistance and promotion as well. And I look forward to an excellent conference. I just remind you to check our schedule and to check your email for the Zoom links for future panels. The next one on culture is starting at 1 o'clock. Civil society later on in the day, I believe it's, when is it? 4 o'clock. And then our keynote speech with Alison Grant, the Director of Eastern Europe and Eurasia at Global Affairs Canada, at 7 o'clock. And certainly we look forward to seeing you at some of those panels as well. But now I will turn it back to Piotr and wish everyone an excellent conference, and you'll be seeing a lot of me in the next couple of days. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. I should say that our institute, EURUS, was very keen to host this event, and I would like to say thank you to Jeff for leading us, and Leah Rasmussen for leading us to this moment that we can join each other. Now, this is the first panel, so let me start from introducing our speakers for today. This panel is titled Power Beyond Borders in Europe and Russia. So in fact, what we are looking for is that you will outline certain regional experiences or country experiences that are vibrating much beyond the borders of the states and regions. So very interesting group of speakers today. I would like to introduce Shaheer, Ahmad, and Mohammad Ali Zafar from National Defense University in Pakistan, and they will be starting presentations talking about the melting Arctic and Kremlin's political economy and future geopolitical scenario. And our second speaker will be Mr. Sean Havel from Carleton University in Ottawa. He will be talking about strategic power Europe, a contradiction in terms, ? And Sean is the second-year student at MA program in EURUS, and also he had some experience with the Association of United Nations in Canada. And then our last speaker will be Mr. Ahmad Kazemzadeh, who holds the MA from University of Ottawa in conflict studies and PhD from Warsaw University. And he will be talking about the armed conflicts between Georgia and Russia, case studies of EU policies towards peace process over there. Gentlemen, you know the drill, because we distributed some guidelines. Everyone has 15 minutes, and after 15 minutes, we will start Q&A. section of your presentations, and I believe that we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for each presenter to answer and elaborate on their presentations. We will be finishing sharply at 11:20 because some of us have to go to other classes at Carleton that we run from 11:30. So let me welcome you by saying that we were expecting your presentation for quite a long time. You are most welcome, and we are very glad that we can host you at our institute. So let's start. Shaheer, Ahmad, and Mohammad Ali Zafar. Gentlemen, are you ready for the presentation?
Yes, sir. My fellow will be sharing the screen. We are ready.
Thank you very much. So go ahead, and they will be presenting a paper on melting Arctic, Kremlin's political economy and future geopolitical scenario.
Sir, my fellow is in the waiting list. Please enter him. Okay. Yeah, okay, he's entered. Okay.
That's normal. Ali, are you ready?
Yes, the screen has been shared.
Very good.
So, sir, we can start?
Yes, absolutely.
So, dear panel and Mr. Chair, my name is Shaheer Ahmad, and alongside me is my fellow author, Mr. Mohammad Ali Zafar. We'll be presenting our paper, Kremlin's Political Economy and the Future Geopolitical Scenario. Moving on to the next slide. So, here is the outline. We will explain.
I don't see the slide. Ali, two things. First, if you can slow down a bit, because you speak with your voice is so fast. So.
Okay,
slower,
sorry,
please. And I don't see the screen shared with you.
Sir, screen has been shared, and it is showing.
We see it. We do see the screen.
Because I don't. So means that I have some.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
It has been shown on your side, sir.
I see. So I don't see the screen. Sorry, go ahead, please. I will not disturb your presentation. I will listen to the presentation. Sorry for that.
So we are starting. So, dear panel and Mr. Chair, my name is Shaheer Ahmad, and alongside me is my fellow author, Mr. Mohammad Ali Zafar. I'll be presenting our paper, Kremlin's Political Economy and the Future Geopolitical Scenario. Moving on to the next slide. So, here is the outline we will be explaining, which includes global warming that is acting as a catalyst for a geopolitical contest. Then the theoretical framework, Russian Arctic policy and their policy actions. Then my fellow Mr. Ali will be explaining US as a major geopolitical competitor in the region, Sino-Russian cooperation, challenges and recommendation before concluding our paper. So moving towards the next slide. Arctic, an ample tale of economics, territories, and politics. So the story begins with the temperature, but it's so much more. It's a tale of economics and oil, territories and politics, and the emerging debate of the growing Russian influence in the region. Global warming that is acting as a catalyst for a geopolitical contest. The melting Arctic is changing everything. The race for the newly accessible resources is beginning, and Russia is gaining ground. These changes in the Arctic are catalyzing a new geopolitical contest by opening a door to access the virgin energy reservoirs that drags the region to the resource competition. Therefore, the region is turning to be a hotspot for a geopolitical competition among the great powers. These changes are setting the course for the Russian political economy and the future geopolitical chessboard with respect to other major competitors, including the US, that is working to counter the Russian territorial claims and maintain a free and open access to the region. Moving towards the next slide, that is a theoretical framework. The hub of the study, it aims to unmask the political economy and the geopolitics. Therefore, the study deems it necessary to employ the concept of the Nash equilibrium by John Nash and theory of sea power by Alfred Thayer Mahan. Moving towards the John Nash. So if we talk about Nash, the Nash model incorporates the set of actions, set of players, and a payoff function for each player in a game. The payoff strategy Nash equilibrium depicts an environment in which no single player can guarantee an optimal outcome while deviating unilaterally from the commonly agreed strategy. The race for the extraction of the energy reservoirs lying in the seabed of Arctic drags the great power, notably Russia, China, and the US, towards a new great game. So talking specifically, the restricted maneuver of the choices presented to the players in the case of Russia and China are fraught with the striking condition of the prisoner's dilemma, in which each player can either defect or cooperate. So on one hand is the dependence of the Russian economy on the natural resources and its reliance on the East Asian markets, while on the other hand, China's collaboration with Yamal Lng project is dependent on the Russian approval to take out any search and expedition in the Arctic. The second theory that is applied on the geopolitics is the theory of sea power by Sir Alfred Thayer Mahan that describes the sea as a great highway. This highway can be termed as a trade route. So the changes in the Arctic Ocean and the opening of the northern passage from the dream to reality demonstrate the significance of the need of the Russian sea power. The opening of the NSR transforms Russia from a land power to a maritime power. Although Russia is bordered between east, west, and south, but in the north, it is impregnable. The coastline is impregnable, which allows Russia to dominate the region, thus making Mahan's thesis very significant to understand the future geopolitical scenario. So as a result, both theories of economics and geopolitics explain the Kremlin's political economy and the geopolitical scenario in Arctic through an optimal lens. Moving on to the next slide, that is about the Russian Arctic policy. As we all know that the Arctic had gained prominence to the international agenda of Russia, for which Kremlin had introduced new Arctic strategy till 2035, moving towards that Arctic strategy. So the policy posture adopted by the Moscow as its Arctic strategy, it includes the utilization of the Arctic as a strategic resource base to fulfill the socio-economic needs of the country. Moreover, it also centers to use the Northern Sea route as a maritime trade route. So Kremlin's plan to develop the NSR as a global shipping route will allow Kremlin to dominantly play in the geopolitics of the Arctic. Moreover, on the other hand, the intensified of the Northern Sea Fleet to establish the effective monitoring system for the surface and underwater activities shows that how regulation and control of the shipping along the NSR is a priority for the Kremlin.
Hello.
Now moving on to the policy.
Sir, can you slow down a bit? I have a notification from other participants that they cannot follow you properly. So slow down a bit. Thank you.
Okay, so moving towards the Arctic policy actions, that first is the Yamal Lng. As we all know that gas has remained a strategic element for the Kremlin's political and economic interplay. The unique feature of Russia is that it has used gas as a geopolitical weapon for many years. Hence, the Yamal Lng is believed to harness 926 billion cubic meters of natural gas and perhaps is the most successful project during the last decade in terms of project and the cost management. The efficiency of the project can be assessed through its effort to fetch an international consortium, which comprises the French company Total with the LNG expertise, a major consumer of LNG in the form of CNPC, China National Petroleum Corporation, and a major financing route of the Silk Road Fund. So this proceeding with high pace of the project had put its international and domestic rivals at disrepute. Question may arises that why Kremlin is supporting the project. So if we talk about the rationale to support the Kremlin's project, we can say that the rationale behind the Kremlin support in the project lies behind the fact that it has been trying to branch out the scope of LNG industry to reduce its reliance on the European markets. These efforts in the LNG exports will enable the Kremlin to enhance its status of the energy superpower. Moving to the next policy action, that is the opening of the Northern Sea route. So the opening of the Northern Sea route is a part of Kremlin's strategic priorities that enable and provide Kremlin a shortcut to Asia. This route significantly reduces the distance from Yamal to Asia as compared to the Suez Canal route. It connects the Atlantic to Pacific and is considerably an important trade route for both Europe and Asia, which is discussed in detail in our paper. So we can say that increase in traffic in the NSR along with the increase in the gross revenue of the transportation, as mentioned in slide, are few of the vital measures taken by the Kremlin to advance its commercial and geopolitical goals in the region. That includes to increase the traffic in the NSR to 80 million tons per year by 2024. But however, this goal doesn't seem realistic, but according and along 2030, the NSR will emerge as a global key trade route and increase in the gross revenue of transportation by 84% per annum in 2018. Moving on to the next slide, that is a revival of the Northern Sea Fleet. So the refurbishment of the NSR is linked with the Russian objective to preserve its territorial integrity. The economic concerns of the Russian Arctic policy are noted with the matter of prestige that ultimately lies on the military might. It is a Northern Fleet and its nuclear-powered submarines equipped with the ballistic missiles SSBNs that consolidate the Kremlin's belief on the primacy of the hard power. The privilege of the fleet not only enhances Kremlin's geographical position, but it also grants Kremlin a strategic advantage to conduct a hostile operation against its adversaries. So Kremlin has taken a series of steps that are mentioned in the slide that includes granting the Northern Sea Fleet the status equivalent to the existing 4 military districts of the East, West, and South, modernization of the Northern Fleet to protect its oil and gas terminals that are strategic assets to the Kremlin, moreover, the addition of the defensive and offensive capabilities by stationing the S-400 and equipping the MiG-31 squadron with KS-47 M2 Kinzhal missiles that will project the military prowess of Kremlin in the Arctic. And last, the access of the Northern Fleet to the high seas will enhance Kremlin's offensive and defensive capabilities, while the functioning of the NSR will bring Russia in a position to control the traffic at the NSR. So moving towards the next slide, that how opening of the NSR is a strategic enabler for the Yamal Lng and the Northern Sea Fleet. So we can say that the blessing of the NSR inaugural is entangled, however, with the condition of prisoner's dilemma, in which Kremlin cannot get an optimal outcome while deviating unilaterally from the commonly agreed strategy as set in the national equilibrium, because the East Asian markets are the major consumer of the LNG products. The Yamal LNG will allow Kremlin to attract the potential customers by offering them the Arctic LNG at a very low cost. This functioning of the NSR will back these ventures of the Yamal by providing them a feasible route to the East Asian markets. So on the other hand, the Northern fleets also remain at the focal point when it comes to the maritime shipping in the NSR, because Northern Sea Route is strategic enabler for the Kremlin, but it requires a Northern fleet to deter the United States, who is a major geopolitical challenge for Russia. Thus, the success of the Kremlin's policy is dependent upon the successful functioning of the NSR. Now, my fellow author, Mr. Mohammad Ali Zafar, will present the rest of the paper.
I will be most grateful for your colleague to speak slowly, please, because we cannot get the main points. Thank you very much in advance. Ali, please go ahead. You have about 5 to 6 minutes.
Thank you, my fellow, regarding the melting of Arctic and the opening of NSR, which is going to act as a strategic as the strongest military region, has directly US interest, leading towards great power. Well, despite the change in administration, Washington's policies have remained somewhat same in Arctic. Obama, Trump, and now Biden all view Russia and China suspiciously in the region. Moving on to US Arctic strategy released in 2019, US views 3 major threats in the region. First, a possible attack on the US homeland is expected as per the Coast Guard document 2019. The second threat to the rule-based order from Russia and China is expected by using the NSR and possible use of force against foreign vessels operating against Russia from the So to counter Russia, in the Arctic will be moving on three actions. First, to Coast Guard and naval providence in the Arctic, which icebreakers are to be to strengthen rule-based eager to cooperate with allies. This is a recent discussion over US-Canadian defense cooperation. Thirdly, the US will aim to innovate and promote resilience and prosperity in the region, which is evident from Trump's approach towards Arctic Council to promote cooperation, coordination, and interaction among Arctic states. So to counter Russia and China, other than these expected policy responses, US has taken certain measures in the region. First is to intensify military presence, for which US has expanded its Marines in Norway from 330 to 700 as requested by Norway's government. Thus, the geopolitical proximity of these actions under the shadow of Russia will increase hostility between Norway and Russia, as Russia has already warned Norway that such actions will have consequences. Then, Air Force deployment has been observed to improve air combat planning, for which the US has planned to add 2 squadrons of advanced F-35A in Alaska by 2022, which will already join the already included 2 squadrons of F-22 Raptors. Similar actions to increase naval presence have been taken as well, such as in 2018, the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier sailed above the Arctic Circle Cold War. Strategically, as per some scholars, US might deploy large surface warships and sea-based ballistic missiles systems in Arctic as well. But while understanding this whole scenario, US position is weak in comparison to increasing Russian presence, Sino-Russian cooperation, and the weak US hard power in the region, as hinted earlier regarding US lack of icebreakers, which are discussed in detail in our paper. The weak US presence can also be observed from the statement which is mentioned in our slide by Coast Guard Captain Griggy, who commands the lone US military icebreaker traveling to the Arctic each year, who states that the nation doesn't have deep to operate up here power and protect our national interest. But if these plans by US are materialized, it could open a hard security threat for Russia in the region. Now, moving on to Sino-Russian cooperation. US as a major geopolitical competitor provides a prelude for Sino-Russian cooperation. We have this. This is why Sino-Russian cooperation is crucial and has entered from two fronts, economic and diplomatic. This is observed from the cooperation over Yamal Lng and the acceptance of China as a near-Arctic state, as explained by Mr. Shaheer. The acceptance of China as a near-Arctic state shows Moscow's realization to strengthen their already $110 billion trade relationship. Then the recent economic investments, such as the construction of the Baltimore railway, harbor construction, the joint gas project of the Siberia pipeline, and the construction of the railway from Western Siberia are few of the most vital infrastructural development, as mentioned in slides, to strengthen the bilateral ties in the region. Now, moving on to this point, we have observed that Russia remains to be the anchor of Chinese engagement in the region, which is intensifying Kremlin's economic growth. Now, moving on to challenges for Russia. So first is the deployment of NATO forces in Iceland that creates a security situation in the region, which will hinder the economic incentives that remains to be Kremlin's major interest. Second is that China's short-term goals are clear that have been supported by Kremlin, but the agreement over long-term strategy, which can temper the Sino-Russian partnership by unfulfilled expectations. And the question arises how? So, for example, what if China is not provided with the ownership of its investment due to Russian reluctance to concede the ownership? Third point, well, China's role remains skeptic as it desires to maintain a military foothold in the region, which is evident from Chinese urge in buying a military base in Greenland. Another concern is over the legal discrepancies. Russian claim over the NSR is not legally acceptable as per United Nations law of sea. Hence, viewing NSR as part of its territorial water unreveals the legal discrepancies. Now, moving on to recommendations for Russia. Sino-Russian cooperation must be transformed from short-term strategy to a long-term strategy to hold the regional stage. If both states are able to introduce a joint statement over regional cooperation for a longer run, hence it will allow Russia to understand the long-term ambitions of China. Then Russia must balance out its cooperative efforts with China to keep the pawns under Kremlin's control. For this, Russia must add players such as India, South Korea, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and even EU's Arctic members to diversify its capital pool. For this, the Ministry of the Russian Far East and Arctic Development in 2019 can be utilized as well. So this is important, but these long-term strategic goals is believable if Russia is able to prevent any escalation of conflict with US. Moreover, Russia must avoid military confrontations with regional players as well. I believe, yes, maximization of power is important, yet it is important to keep the arena free of conflict to reap the benefit from the NSR and allow maximum cooperation in the region. Another recommendation is that Kremlin must keep the Chinese military presence out of the region, but joint military exercises between the two will help to pressurize US counteractions. Kremlin must ensure this to China, that any cooperation in the sphere of maritime security will be to protect mutual economic activities. Finally, Russia must solve legal discrepancies in the region because China in the interim is not questioning Russian position in the Arctic. Along with the Russian definition of agencies are a Russian water which is visible because over sea is somewhat similar to Russian claim in this region. That's why Russia must increase its acceptability even if it requires supporting Chinese claim over South China Sea. Now, moving on to the conclusion. Well, to conclude our presentation, we have tried to understand where the region is heading. Well, region is shaping towards a geopolitical competition. The melting Arctic has allowed Russia to gain ground. The future of the region will evolve around how Biden will play in the region. His statement that alliances are our greatest asset raises the question for the future. So we will conclude our presentation saying that in this entire scenario, Russia has the lead along with China, along with which China is willing to maximize its cooperation with Russia. Hence, Russia must improve its standing through cooperation with China, plus increase its trust in Arctic Council to gain more support for its regional goals. So this was all from our presentation on our topic, Melting Arctic, Kremlin's political economy and future geopolitical scenario. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much to both. It was, to me, very fast moving. but also very interesting presentation. So to me, I believe that many in the audience they will have questions or comments. As for me, the most important is the junction between the current US-Russia, US-China relations and how this rather conflictual or confrontational policies will influence the Russian in the Arctic. The more US is pushing Russia, the more Russia is embracing China, and vice versa. So for me, it's rather obvious that in the current lack of mutual trust between US and Russia and China, and almost a confrontational behavior by Mr. Biden calling President of Russia or agreed to the statement that he is a killer, means this is the low end of the relations. So you are still open for different types of scenario, pending an improvement of potential improvement of the Chinese-US relations and Russia-US relations. So my question would be whether or not your different scenario are already diminished to one scenario, to the confrontational scenario. And I would be welcome other comments and questions as well from the audience, please. So who would like to start, Shaheer or Ali?
So we'll both be answering because we both are the co-authors. We both are the authors of the paper because we both have an equal share in the paper. So we will both be answering the questions. Okay, sure, go ahead. Yes, sir, you should go ahead. I ask the questions. Ali, would you like to answer?
Yes, sir. I have a question.
Yes,
if
sir.
You could accept it. So you talked about in one of your slides, you had mentioned about the modernization of Russia's northern fleet to protect its natural resources, namely its oil and gas terminals.
Yes, sir.
Did you do any research into where these resources are headed in terms of destination, if they're domestic, headed to Europe to trade or to Asia to trade? And how do you think that that would affect their respective regions' inclination to work with Russia on its Arctic policy?
Sir, if we talk about the Northern Sea Fleet, as you have mentioned that, where are these installations are heading? So if we talk specifically about the Yamal LNG project, so we can see that the construction of the Sabita airfield and the other constructions on the Balfour railway that is mentioned in the slide of my co-author. So these are some examples of these installations. And as you have mentioned that some of where these installations are heading. So some of these installations we have mentioned in our research paper. So we can, so when we send it to you, so you can see it in there.
Thank you very much. Ali, would you like to add?
Yes, sir. So
we don't hear you, Ali.
Yes. So I think there was a bit of fluctuation in the sound. So yeah, I believe that when we discuss about this thing, we discuss in our paper a very intriguing point that was very fascinating for me was that the cooperation in 19, what they aim is that they must be utilizing it to materialize the potential of the high north and its combination with Asian states. So this is where I believe I might be able to answer your question. Then the other thing is that it will be reducing trade for China and for Japan and these states by half the distance, and we have provided the details of those of these elements in our paper as well. Then there's other thing that I explained regarding the construction of the railways, transportations, and how then there's another thing that we have also mentioned in our paper, that is the connection of BRI with Eurasian Economic Union. So that shows where both of them are collaborating and moving their market towards those Central Asian states, and this is how they are collaborating with each other.
Thank you very much. I feel that there will be some other questions, but since the presentation took a little bit longer than we planned, let's leave other questions to the end of the panel, and then we'll move right now with the second presentation by Mr. Sean Havel on Strategic Power Europe, a contradiction in terms. Sean, the floor is yours. I am grateful to both presenters so far for the very good beginning of our conference. Sean, the floor is yours.
So hello everyone, my name is Sean Havel. I'm a second year's master's student in European Russian Studies. I'm presenting you Strategic Power Europe, a contradiction in terms. So my question for this research has been, why has the European Union securitized aspects of itself since 2016? And we need to understand, first of all, what is this securitization all about? So we need to understand the new mechanism. So since 2016, the European Union has started to securitize aspects of itself and formed a sort of coherent geopolitical strategy. We look at the EU global strategy, which was a founding document which outlined the strategic issues and the strategic concerns of the European Union and how best to counter them, but didn't offer any strategic advice or future scenario planning. But then coming into 2017, we see the activation of permanent structured cooperation. What this enabled was the joint capabilities of European states to jointly create capabilities and defense cooperation in a differentiated manner so that multiple member states can be involved in over 46 different projects. This is in coordination with the Coordinated Annual Review on Defense, which assesses these things, the European Defense Fund, which funds these projects, and military planning conduct capability was given extra mandate in order to manage new European missions abroad. This is in combination with very recent developments, the European Industrial Development Program, which essentially funds and offers grants to projects for defense funding, and the European Strategic Compass, which is now in the process of being formulated, which is going to give an identification of the threats and how best to deal with them, and essentially standardize foreign policy across the Union. And so if we take a look at all the different policies, this isn't just regular cooperation. This is full-on military capability projects. We see everything from new corvettes to new helicopters to technical capabilities to coordinate the existing member states. It's nothing like we've seen in the 1990s. This is far more serious, far more invested, and there's a lot of money flying around. But we need to understand the theoretical challenge of why this cooperation is happening. And this has been me for the last few months trying to figure this out. Explaining this to people either gets two responses. One, people think, okay, Europe's going to create an army, European army, we're going to see this European federalized army, or that the projects are going to fail purely due to the internal factors that the member states will never be able to agree to. I also look to different theoretical views, and they've had a very hard time explaining integration to CSTP. Neo-functionalism is the increasing relevance of institutions to self-perpetuate, whereas realism, as we've seen in the last presentation, very much focuses on the role of the international system and the power dynamics under anarchy. Constructivism, however, is very important as it tells about the growing norms, socializations between different member states. For the interviews I've conducted for this project, it very shows that these individuals are talking to one another and they're starting to speak the same language. But then neoliberalism also takes a very interesting turn in that the growing single market has also started to influence the defense market. But we have to understand that many of these theories initially did not think that defense would become integrated. And we have to understand it as such. Theories by nature perpetuate observation and turn a circumstance into a rule. That's from Hannah Yanan, fantastic author. And my solution is pluralism. Mutual acknowledgement of multiple theoretical views and their coexistence should be encouraged. So the following analysis is going to be taken understanding all the different viewpoints. So let's take a look at the international perspective first. The European security is based on three pillars, I argue: effective institutions, resilient environment, and reliable forces: coordination, stability, capability. All three of these are currently under threat. Since the early 2000s, the European periphery has started to break down in very serious ways. We've seen diplomatic solutions in order to liberalize the economies of states outside the European Union. The European Neighborhood Policy is a great example. And we've seen limited missions carried out by the European Union in various states, mainly civilian in nature though. But the result has been this: the ongoing armed conflicts in the world as of March 2021 are centered specifically around the Union, as we can clearly see. And for this brings three major concerns. The first is a growing wave of migrants. Now, I don't want to take a normative standpoint on migration, but this is what the European Union has said. Migration and crime are very much linked, because who do you think brings people to Europe? It's not the Oxfam, for sure. And this also has a link with terrorism, because these groups are benefiting each other and there's a mutual coexistence at play. So if we take a look at this, it provides two major security risks. The first one is the increase in terrorist activities, which we can also see from the destabilization of the periphery, the current wars happening in the Sahel. Jihadists with weapons from the Libyan crisis are essentially using them to fight insurgencies in these areas, promoting these sorts of activities. And the migrant crisis, which has affected politically Europe in profound ways, including the rise of populism. But it's not just this. In the East, you see the political entanglement with Ukraine has not caused a Russian conventional threat, because the individuals I talked to at the European Union have said that the Russian conventional threat is not their concern. It is the cyber activities of Russia that are currently at play. Their ability to spread disinformation and to destabilize the political situation in Europe is of great concern. And so for this, the European Union will need to have a response. Now, traditionally, we would have an institution for this, right? We would have NATO, but NATO is not available. NATO is not welcome. NATO does not have the right tools. One individual working, I can't say exactly where, but in the European Union told me that this is mainly the reasons why they're very concerned. NATO's expeditionary decade is over, and there's the Turkey factor. And I'll explain this. So first of all, we need to understand NATO currently is not built to do what the European Union needs to do, which is to create a ring around itself, instead of a ring of fire, as it currently is, a ring of stable states, resilient, able to withstand shocks. NATO does not have the political, civil, and economic ability to deal with the crisis situation. It is a military organization. This leads into the idea that NATO is not welcome. Whenever NATO enters a state, begins bombing, and then leaves with no civilian response afterwards, we get situations like the Libyan crisis. At the same time, NATO is starting to rebrand itself. The alliance would benefit from, according to NATO 2030, United for a New Era, it's the new policy paper, it just got released, re-embracing a vision of NATO from earlier decades as a preventative tool to shape its environment rather than for managing crises. The character of NATO is changing. Instead of being an organization that intervenes abroad, it is a tripwire specifically built for the Russian threat. At the same time, Turkey is becoming a major security concern. In every single interview I've done with European member state and EU practitioners, Turkey has been called as a major security concern. An example would be in Libya. NATO was not able to go and intervene and create an arms embargo because of Turkey. Turkey is currently supporting and backing the Tripoli government. And essentially, a plan is to cut off Cyprus, increase the Turkish exclusive economic zone, and gain access to Cypriot gasoline. And this has caused a major security concern, because if Turkey doesn't want NATO to go someplace, they can just veto the issue. So that leaves an institution out of the game, aside from the tripwire. But then we look at the third thing. Okay, what if Uncle Sam can come and fix all of our issues? Well, that is no longer available. Legacy of Trumpism, Biden's security priorities, and the conflict over EU armament are very prominent. First of all, the legacy of Trumpism. First of all, Trump is not going anywhere. Okay, he hasn't been impeached. He can come back at any time. And to a lot of people I've interviewed, this is an overarching concern. At the same time, the breakdown of the INF Treaty and the increased nuclear proliferation in Europe and the inability for the current administration to reestablish the Iran nuclear deal are leaving a lot of Europeans very worried about the future of the Middle East and the future of Eastern Europe. At the same time, the United States is very much focused on the pivot towards the Pacific. The individuals that Biden has put into the organization have been carryovers from the Obama administration that are focused primarily on the move towards Asia. And at the same time, the United States' large-scale open-ended deployments must end, according to Biden. And at the same time, there's now a push for smaller deployments around the world of 100 special forces. This is not enough for crisis management. And at the same time, the United States and the EU are fundamentally opposed in terms of rearmament. In PESCO, the third state participation states they must not lead to dependencies. Any project, capability project the US is involved in, ultimately will lead to dependencies. A lot of the practitioners, by the way, are very uncomfortable answering that. So the internal perspective. I'm looking at 3 different states, and these states are on the spectrum of supporting strategic autonomy all the way, building the EU as a global actor, and supporting the EU as a primarily civil organization. We take a look at Germany. They have created this differentiated approach, which I argue has enabled the EU to become a security actor. Differentiated approach, which they're involved in 38% of PESCO projects, capability, intervention oriented. And Germany has wanted to prevent a 2-speed Europe. That means what Germany really wanted was to avoid getting a group of very ambitious countries and other leaning back and doing nothing. The original plan was France and a few other Western European states would get together and create an intervention force that would be within the EU, but certain countries wouldn't be part of it. To Germany, this was a political question, had nothing to do with the real aim of getting stronger. The idea was to get everyone involved so everyone would be able to invest into the rearmament together. They were scared of a 2-speed Europe, very much so, and this, for Germany, was unacceptable. At the same time, I'm going to argue that the current internal factors of defense industry in Germany has really pushed them towards this. Rheinmetall, Krauss-Maffei Wengmann, ThyssenKrupp, Heckler & Koch, big arms companies which are lobbying for increasing in German funds. This has led to Germany beefing up its defense firms with pandemic relief funds recently, which no one seems to be talking about. And of course, Germany is worried about the security in the periphery. They're embattled in Mali currently against Islamic extremists. International terrorism is a major concern, hybrid threats from Russia, the stabilization of its own internal politics, and the territorial integrity of Europe. We take a look at France and we see the maximalist idea. They want full strategic autonomy. In one interview, it was even mentioned, no one's talking about this, Macron has even offered to share nuclear capabilities with the European Union, which is insane to think about. They're involved in 66% of PESCO projects. They're mainly capability intervention oriented. The most significant is the Crisis Response Operation Corps, called CROC. It is supposed to be the foundation for EU interventions abroad. And we have to understand why they're doing this. First of all, the differentiated attitude allows them to do what they need to do in these initiatives. So that means France is going to be able to do what it wants, and other countries can do what it wants to do as well. And of course, they're going to be really involved. Military engaged in the periphery. They're in Mali, Niger, Libya, Central African Republic, places that practitioners I've talked to have been interested in the EU getting involved in. At the same time, strong defense industry interests, Airbus, Thales, Naval Group, Safran, Dassault. These are big companies. 5.5% of the global defense market is France. And if you take a look, the United States has almost 60%. That's a pretty significant chunk. And this leads also to an increase in the French economy, which, given the current pandemic, is sorely needed. And then the last one is Poland. Poland has been the most resistant towards the EU attaining any form of strategic and security autonomy. They have a traditionalist view of defense. They have a focus on the Russian conventional threat, which means NATO Article 5 is predominant. And one of the reasons for Poland joining PESCO only 4 days before the signing was because they were concerned that it would cause a degradation of the United States' role in Europe and Article 5 as a whole. They also have the only fully nationalized defense industry left in Europe. And that means that any of their industrial also meets their security risks. And they're involved in 25% of PESCO projects, which are all national security oriented. But we have to understand the only reason Poland is going ahead with this is because of differentiation. We will never end up having the same security possessions as Portugal or Spain, which a practitioner I talked to said. The main goal is having the list of actions inclusive enough to accommodate all the concerns of the member states. So we're being realistic. And of course, Poland's being realistic. It wants to meet its own security needs. And if it can do that with 20% discount in all armaments projects, which PESCO and the European Defense Fund's offering, why not? So then we take a look at the different countries on a scale. The US cooperation, we can see Poland's very serious about this. Germany is more economically motivated. And then France is more about strategic autonomy. Whereas does Europe need greater solidarity? Poland, no, it's Article 5. Germany is in the middle. France, we need more solidarity and more strategic autonomy. So then we're going to get to conclusions very quickly. The geopolitical changes in the international system have certainly triggered a response. Unstable periphery, NATO's ineffective, and the US's role is currently uncertain. But we have to understand that the current response is not predetermined. Nothing is predestined. The EU is a political structure that can facilitate this response. And there's a huge economic benefit to these states, which means lobbyist groups will want this to go ahead. More importantly, the differentiated way of doing this means everyone gets something from a strategic Europe. And this is fundamentally why the character of the European Union is not a contradiction of terms, but it's becoming a strategic Europe. I'd like to thank you.
Thank you very much, Sean. It's thank you for being on time, and thank you for the very complex presentation. You know, my first reaction to your presentation is a complexity, and your final sentence that everyone would like to have something out of it makes me a bit skeptical about cohesion of CSDP, in a sense that after your presentation seems that EU is not moving towards the defense union, or is not moving to having a strategic defense approach. So if this is not the case, as I understand your presentation, then what's left for the European Union? If everyone would like to get something, means you have the plurality of beneficiaries, but European Union is out of the question as a main beneficiary as a union in such a situation.
So I actually have the interview right in front of me from the Polish practitioner I talked to. The strategic compass, and I wish I only had 15 minutes. If I had another 5 minutes, I would talk just about strategic compass, because I have many documentation which is not available to most individuals about this. This is from the Polish. The strategic compass itself is a good initiative because the goals of the compass would be to first start to think about the list of threats and challenges. And according to the Polish practitioner I talked to, we already have it more or less agreed or compiled, but he can't talk to me more about this. Essentially, he says right now, the threat analysis from all European states on the agreed threats is very convergent. And they've fully agreed to what needs to be done and what threats there are. The current discussions now are how to tackle them. So when you say you see this very divergent Europe, well, of course it's going to be. We're not going to see a European army. And I think that there is a normative assumption a lot of European scholars have, which is either hyper-Euroscepticism or hyper-Europhilic attitudes. The real thing that is happening is that European states are arming themselves using the European Union, and the European Union is recommending the specific type of armament, the specific type of capabilities they will need. Because in the future, we may not have US airlift. The Europeans may not have American air refueling. The Europeans will need to develop these things themselves, and for the EU to be able to sit down, think, and say, okay, Germany, France, Poland, this is what we need to do. This is the level of ambition. This is the benchmark. That's huge. That's a complete reinvention of what we consider the European Union to be in security, which was really not much. So I would say that in a couple of years, once you see the strategic compass and the discussions that I'll be talking about in my paper come to be, your attitude may very well change. And I hope that it is significant what they put out. From what I've been told, it will be. And then we'll very much be starting to see the EU as not just a civilian economic organization, but as a crisis management organization.
Hopefully it will be the case, Sean. Thank you very much. I would like to ask the audience whether do you have any questions and comments to Sean, please, at this point, or you are thinking about this and we will leave some questions to the end of the panel, as in the first panelists. Professor John de Bardeleben has a question. John, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Sean. I was just wondering if the concept of spillover here would apply at all in terms of, I'm sorry, I don't have my picture on, in terms of neo-functionalism, that you'd also see that as a mechanism that might lead to these initiatives producing some other stronger sort of strategic approach, because you did address theories, and I'm kind of wondering whether that might be a theoretical framework that you might mobilize here.
So it's funny that you mention it. It's been very difficult to fit all of these different perspectives into a single paper, but you're very much correct. Neo-functionalism does have something to say about this. When I talked to the Germans specifically, they said, when we first started making these PESCO projects, it wasn't because they were strategically correct, some of them. It's because we wanted some projects to show off. Another EU practitioner told me, and this is verbatim because I remember this very clearly, we have common market and now we have even a common border security. Why don't we have a common military? So it's this sort of, there's a policy area that the European Union has gotten itself invested into. It's unable to meet those demands. So now the member states say, okay, you can do this for us. But one thing I will say about the neo-functionalists is that it doesn't really explain the kind of spillover we see. What does spillover turn into? It doesn't really explain that specifically. The kind of transformations we're seeing in the European Union are also at play due to the, first of all, the type of security concerns we're seeing. Because I would argue if it was a conventional threat, if Russia was very serious about invading Europe directly, which according to individuals I talked to, definitely does not have the capabilities to invade Europe currently. Aside from nuclear deterrent, which would be counterintuitive, we would be seeing a more conventional approach from the Union. But this is the age of crisis management. So we're seeing the type of spillover into crisis management response. And that very much has to deal with the international system. It also has to deal with the defense companies that are directly benefiting from not just development of military capabilities, but from dual use technologies that are being purchased by European militaries.
John, it's you would like to follow up, John, or you are satisfied with the answer?
No, I mean, I think that's kind of what I was getting at, but I was meaning more specifically with PESCO. That PESCO, I mean, what Professor Dutkiewicz said about this being limited to kind of interests of member states. And if PESCO itself would put in place some, if you could foresee some way in which the mechanisms that PESCO puts in place would generate, therefore, a spillover effect to a more strategic approach. And maybe that's already happened with the strategic compass.
No, I think it partially has. So Crisis Response Operation Corps, Sven Biskop, who I've talked to personally about this, wrote very fantastic, 3 really good articles on the Crisis Response Operation Corps. The CROC is essentially this entity that's going to be created through PESCO, which is going to coordinate crisis response and management abroad and essentially operationalize the EU battle groups that have just been sitting around for ages. And if you don't know what the EU battle groups are, these are brigade or battalion sized entities that are created from multiple European countries on a rotational basis. It's technically what some people could presume as a European army. They've never been operationalized by the member states. What CROC intends to do is to create the framework for that, which then in turn could create the spillover until once the mechanism is created, then they could say, okay, they do crisis management, now we need to do blank, and we need to do blank, we need to do blank. So we're going to need anti-drone equipment. So this means one of the capabilities the EU is developing, and this sounds science fiction, but it's real. It's fully automated, essentially a tank platform that can shoot a very high-powered laser off of it to kill drones and also fit a railgun onto it. So we're talking about a military that the EU is designing, which just very low on the casualty spectrum, because of course they don't want to be bringing body bags home. Very low on the casualty spectrum. Most of it's going to be automated and modular. So I do agree with you, though. Once these mechanisms are in play, the spillover will follow. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sean. If I can ask anyone who would like to follow Sean's presentation with comments and questions, to save your question to the end of the panel, as we shall move to another presentation. Sean, thank you very much for showing us all the complexity of the CSDP and sharing your optimism about the European Union future capacity for the playing a significant role in the security in the neighborhood. I would like to invite Ahmad Kazemzadeh to present his paper on armed conflict between Georgia and Russia, case studies of EU policies towards peace process. Hamid, you are welcome.
Hello to everyone. I'm Mohammad Kazemzadeh, currently working as a researcher at the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project in Washington, D.C., but my base is in Ottawa. At the first, thanks to dear Professor Dutkiewicz. It's great honor and pleasure to be here today and to present my work at your panel. Additionally, thanks to the organizer of EURUS Graduate Student Research Conference, and specifically Professor Shaheer and their Lee, for allowing me to present my paper. Let me share my screen to continue. Yeah, sure. Okay, great. Okay. Yeah. As you see in the title, I'm just going to highlight some important points on the EU's role in the armed conflict between Georgia and Russia in the case of Abkhazian and Ossetians peace building. Let me actually talk about my main argument here. My main argument in this paper is that despite the long peace process in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, at the first mediated and arranged by the United Nations and Russia, and then negotiated and mediated since 2008 by the European Union and Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, has not brought any serious progress toward the peace settlement and conflict resolution in the region. Let me start by geographical concentration. I want to actually focus on this conflict zone. Probably the most of you know the Western Caucasus as a part of Georgia, and it slips on toward the main ridge of the Great Caucasus Mountain, often considered the border between Europe and Asia. Geopolitically, it's so important for Europe, and because it's a neighbor of southern neighbor of Russia, northern of Iran, and eastern of Turkey, and northern of the greater Middle East. So geopolitically, by the way, actually is so important for the European Union. It's a summary, as you see, mostly is to explore most roots of this conflict and how it plays in and influences the peace process. Moreover, the main aim of my presentation is to give a more updated perspective of Abkhazian and South Ossetian conflict and how to explore how it plays in EU policies toward the peace process. To explain the relatively stable frozen nature of the conflict, the research focuses on the role of the EU as a main mediator, specifically since 2008, by analyzing the peace process of settlement and particularly the errors made by international organizations and other external players. This paper will present to then recommend the new potential peace approaches to the conflict in this area based on the historical roots and previous peace building experiences. In the light of conflict studies and merged with the East European studies, I found that my main question could fit into Carleton triangle, as you see in this chart, to find the answer more easily, and then I will have much more analysis. I will back for the conclusion to the ABC triangle. Just I wanted to show you my answer, how actually they fit with this triangle. Uh, the main the research mapping is based on these four step A, B, C, D. Definitely today I'm going to talk from the since 2008. I mean, I will focus on C and D. But if you want to actually understand the European policy toward the peace building in the Caucasus, we should actually map all of these parts. I mean, what was the background, roots before, during the Soviet Union and even before the Soviet Union, after the collapse of the Soviet Union till 2008, when we have the 5 days war, and then from the 5 days war and to current time. I mean, how was the peace process by EU after the conflict and why not resulted? It's important. So, and then I will have actually some proposal and recommendation for the future. As I told you, for the part A and B, it's not important to talk about that. Probably you know the most of the, and we can actually bring a bunch of the factors and elements why we have this conflict in the region. But the reason of the crisis, probably, by the way, you know, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, what was between the parties. There wasn't any mediator. By the way, economic problems in the region, not in the Caucasus, Eastern Europe, and the Central Asia actually was another reason for the formation of the armed conflict in all regions, not just in this specific case. And the self-confidence of the Georgian government after the Rose Revolution. Let me actually talk about the part C, the peace process and international attention, because when we have 2008, August 2008 war, we have international attention to the Caucasus. Where is this region? What was this conflict? Where is Abkhazia? What is actually, what Ossetians are talking about? So the international attention came. By the way, EU policies came closer to the region, because before 2008, honestly, they weren't care about the region. But after 2008, the security of energy, I think, came up for the priority, their policy. So the literature on the subject is mainly on diverse and often constructed interest between the EU countries and Russia on the question of energy security in the South Caucasus. And unfortunately, not frankly, on the social and political reconciliation and ethnic and national solidarities for sustainable peace in the conflict zone. Also, it's the main challenge of this research, because the most of the literature focus on European and Russian interests in the conflict, not the peace settlement in the conflict zone. Let me actually see what I mean. So first, I should actually tell you about the EU's roles and their policy. There has been a lack of, unfortunately, coherence in EU's policy to conflict resolution in the South Caucasus from the early 1990s until the aftermath of the Russia and Georgia conflict, I mean 2008. EU policy toward the region focused primarily on the solution to stop the war at the beginning. EU mediation in the South Caucasus was prompted by the outbreak of the armed conflict in August 2008. During the crisis, during the war, the EU increased its political level of engagement by appointing the European Union Special Representative and sending the European Union monitoring mission to Georgia and establishing Geneva process. Then, for the first time, the European Parliament resolution of 20 May 2010 on the need for an EU strategy for the South Caucasus focus on the problems after the Georgian-Russian war on occupation by Russian forces, subsequently Georgian territory. These policies developed in 3 steps. The first, EU mediation, marked by 2 ceasefire agreements, as you remember probably, a 6-point peace agreement on ceasefire, if you remember, I think Sarkozy, the president of the European Council, actually mediated. The second was a declaration of the European Council and European Commission. The second level revealed the differing position and limited security capability of EU member states. By the way, actually, when we are actually talking about the conflict in the Caucasus, not all members in the EU have a same and harmony policy toward the region. So we don't hear any same voice from Brussels toward the South Caucasus. The third stage argued that the differences among the member states over the deployment of the monitoring mission challenge the exciting view of the effectiveness of the European Union monitoring mission in Georgia. Another factor that was so important, and it was the main activity of the European EU toward the peace building in the region, was the Geneva process, or the Geneva International Discussion. It was actually first an international talk to address the consequences of the 2008 war in Georgia. They were launched in Geneva in October 2008 and were co-chaired by Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the EU, and the UN. This process brought together representatives of all parties, I mean all participants of the conflict, Georgia, Russia, Georgians, Breakaway, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia, as well as the United States. The Geneva process started as a peace platform to negotiate security and stability in Abkhazia and South Ossetia as a Georgian territory, and to present the new format of the talk. A month after 5 days war, the EU Council appointed the European Union Special Representative for the conflict to take the lead the Geneva International Discussion that brings all parties to conflict for the peace talk. Although the EU tried a readiness to create a dialogue between parties, and GID revealed three major limitations. First, following the EU non-recognition policy, the European Union Special Representative had a predetermined position about the status of Abkhazia and South Ossetia that inherently limited its neutrality when representing the Council and playing as a mediator. Second, the varying preferences of the conflict parties overstepped the EU's already retained leverage and limiting the outcome of the negotiation. The third reason that diminished the EU's impact was the lack of obligation from the EU to address the political appearance of the conflict. During the rounds held between 2008 and till last year, the limited socio-political dimension of the EU's engagement has reestablished the status quo in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are currently recognized as independent state by Russia and some other countries in UN. Let me back to my theoretical framework to sum up. The peace road that parties have taken since the 90s turned out to be full of errors. Since the 90s, Abkhazian Ossetian ethno-nationalism, a sound peace had nevertheless been voiced on several occasions and regrets. Georgia failed to break out wrecking conflict with outcomes that continue to visit the country due to the lack of the interest of international community toward the South Caucasus in the 90s. Georgia's ethnopolitical issue would figure out the global agenda only to a scope which Russia was be considered as the main player and mediator. This situation had led to localization and absence of international community in the peace process, at the beginning. Moreover, an outward perception that conflict would be easy to resolve, exceptionally characterizing the period between 1995 and 2007 had contributed to spoiling valuable time and missing opportunities that affected all parties. The signing of quasi-annexation treaties between Moscow and de facto authorities of Abkhazia and South Ossetia was a symptom that EU peace policy was moving away and entering a wider geopolitical context. Unfortunately, it was what we have right now. Admitting that the key negotiation plan is overall faded more than 10 years in the post-conflict era. Anyway,
Hamid, can you wrap up because you're already gone? So
sure.
just go to the final line, please.
Yeah, sure. Actually, the final, anyway, by analyzing the peace process settlement and particularly the errors made by the EU, actually, I could recommend to EU member state or EU communities how they can actually move forward for joining the peace building process. They actually, as you see, there is free dialogue with Russia to allow Russian peacekeepers to be replaced internationally mandate and international peacekeepers, and pressure on Russian and Abkhazian South Ossetian authorities get them to allow EU monitors full access to other zones of the conflict. I think these two free parts can actually help EU policies more engagement to the peace process. Thank you in advance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamid. Very, very interesting. Raises plenty of issues. For instance, two comes immediately to mind. One is the role of a protector state, and in this case, the protector of both Abkhazia and Ossetia and South Ossetia are Russians. And here is the first line of inability of creating inability for the European Union, because a lot of things depends on the role of protector. To what extent Russians will agree to the EU activities there. And the second is the dynamics, internal dynamics on the ground. What I mean is, to a certain extent, institutionalization of the frozen conflict. These people are living with their own local government that provide them with a certain goods, employment, and so on and so forth. And they are starting to play a significant role as almost independent actors in this conflict.
Exactly true. Unfortunately, the EU policies right now toward the region, it's quite depends on the Russia's policies toward the region, because they don't want to actually have a more conflict and touchable ties with Russia in another geopolitical regions. By the way, as I told you, Germany actually have another policy, for example, because of the Northern Stream pipeline from Russia, or actually Eastern countries like Bulgaria and Romania, they have other policies toward this region. So the Europe in this case is not one particular or one particular voice. They have different approach, different policies, and it's exactly right now happening in the conflict zone. They are almost independent, and they don't have any actually connection with the motherland. I mean, Georgia, and they don't have any connection to Tbilisi, and it's unfortunately it's going to be worse.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank to all presenters. We have still some time, 10 minutes to or so to discuss very rich presentations. So, dear audience, that is the time for you to let me know that you would like to make a comments or ask the questions to all presenters this time.
Okay. So thank you to all of our presenters. Piotr had to step out to his class, but I thought we had some great questions and wanted to use the whole time of our session. I really enjoyed kicking off with a very vibrant panel and a lot of different perspectives. And thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to our questioners and to our presenters again. And I welcome you to our next session at 1 o'clock on culture. And hopefully you'll be able to attend many sessions throughout the day, and our keynote address at 7 with Alison Grant of Global Affairs Canada. So thanks to all, and I wish you a good rest of the morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Bye.